Okay, it says we're live now. Yeah, that's really weird. We're having some technical issues, which is very, very strange. Yeah, so
Yes.
it showed you not there anymore. But anyway, you're here.
And
Hi,
I,
Corinne. Hi, Will. Hi, folks.
so Elizabeth, to
Oh,
me, it looks
wow.
like,
I see somebody join me from my old life. Wow. I see you, Captain. Um, hey, everybody. Oh gosh. We left the USA for Panama. Your name is escaping me, but I love her publication. She writes about being. See you guys here. I'm here with Deidre Keller, the the emigrant to Barbados who originally was a client who I ended up being able to connect with another client who's moving to Barbados or who already moved at this point, which is just fascinating to me. Like, not fascinating, but it's not really a surprise, but it's like a welcome joy for me that like the two of
yeah,
you connected and you're both moving to the same place at the same timeline, like, doing her own thing on Substack, which I encourage you to go ahead and talk about, Deidre. And I'm Elizabeth
sure.
Silleck La Rue, Immigration Consulting Services. I help people leave the United States with their environmental, cultural, and economic impacts in mind. And, and I primarily work with people who are targets of this regime. So, talk to us, Deidre. Tell people who you are, and then we'll get started on the immigration talk.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Deidre Keller, and just a heads up, Elizabeth, for me, it still looks like we're in the preview mode. So I can't see any of what's happening in the chat or any of that. So, so hi everyone who's joining. I can't see who our viewers are.
Wow,
I
that's
can't see the chat.
weird.
I can't see anything. Yeah. So, yes, I'm Deidre Keller.
Well,
I
we do have
am
15 people in the chat right now.
excellent. Hi, everybody. I am a lawyer by training, an educator by practice, right? I've been in legal education for 16 years now. Just about to start my 17th academic year, which, makes me feel a little bit like an old lady, but such is life. And I will be doing that work, teaching virtually from Barbados starting in just a couple of weeks here. So that will be a new and different experience. We are in Florida right now, headed back to Barbados on August 19th. And I'm happy to talk through, the kind of process, the immigration process that we've been through that we're kind of still in because I have a mixed citizenship family. And so the method that we used to get to Barbados was simplest for me because I have documents that is just an American. It's just as it. So it's a little bit of a different process.
You froze up a little bit there.
Oh, I was saying I'm happy to talk through where we are in the immigration process in terms of like the getting documentation and all of that. Because it's a little bit we're kind of in three different places because of our different citizenship statuses, right? So my husband and my son and I are immigrating to Barbados together. Our son is 14, and the process has just been different for each of us because we have different kinds of documentation coming into Barbados. So yeah, I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
through all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And before you talk through that, if people are interested in that, I just wanted to note that, when you have a mixed status family, a mixed immigration status family, the people in your family have dual citizenship or access to
Hmm.
citizenship by descent, for one person, but the other person doesn't, but they're married so they can get it. And it complicates your process a little bit, but it complicates, but not necessarily slows down, not necessarily makes it
Right.
harder. It just there's more variables to consider for each person. So,
Yes, exactly.
and for that reason, if you're seeking the assistance of an attorney or something like that, you may end up having to spend a little bit more money, because there's more
Mhm.
more variety in process. But
Right.
what I would love to ask you right now, because I
Mhm.
think one of the questions that I get most frequently from people who are like, I know I don't want to live in the US, but they're not really sure where they would want to go is how did
Mhm.
you choose Barbados? Like what was the calculus for your family, all the different variables?
Yes. So, a few things here. So, some background by way of background. Reggie and I have moved together essentially across the country twice before deciding to move away from the US, right? So we had moved from Atlanta to Ohio in 2010 and then from Ohio to Florida in 2020. And when we were coming to Florida, because we had lived in rural Ohio, where my children were very visibly minorities, um, when we were coming to Florida, I really wanted my kids who were still in school, so we still had two kids in school then, to be in places that were very diverse, right? So
Mhm.
because of that, we chose where we were going to live was like a place where the high school was predominantly Black. Um, and so that was on our minds already. My husband wanted to
Mhm.
leave the States 10 years ago, like back when Trump was first elected. Reggie was ready to leave the States. And so we had started thinking about like
Mhm.
where might we go back then. And we kind of knew we wanted to go someplace that was predominantly Black. It was on our minds, right?
Mhm.
We
And
looked
just
very
to like clarify for those who don't know, your whole family is Black, right?
yes, 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 yeah, very much so. Ian tells people that he's mixed.
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Mixed with what, sir?" And he's like, "African American and Caribbean." And so that's mixed in his right. And in where we live, right, exactly. Where we live, I mean, here in Florida, where there are lots of kids who have Caribbean parentage, and there are lots of African American kids, this has some salience, Um, but he's funny.
Mhm.
So, but yes, my family is Black. So we knew we wanted to go someplace predominantly Black. We have 4 sons older than Ian and a daughter. And so we had raised 5 big kids in very racially challenging, that's how we're gonna put it, places. And so we
Mhm.
knew that
Mhm.
we wanted to get Ian out of that and as much as possible. So that was on our minds. And then we knew we needed someplace where you could get a really good education. I mean, a big part of the reason that we decided to leave the States when we did is because the education system here in Florida is just atrocious. Um, and I really wanted
Mhm.
Ian to have,
Mhm.
you know, the kind of education that's going to make him a competent citizen, right? And that was a challenge. Like getting my older kids, that was a challenge in better school situations. And so I knew that if we stayed in Florida, I was going to be fighting, like fighting Ian, fighting the school to get them to do basic stuff like read books. And I just didn't want to do that. Right. And so those were kind of the things that we had on our minds.
Mhm.
And then I really wanted to go someplace where English is spoken because I did not like if you go
Mhm.
someplace where you have
Mhm.
to learn the language, there's going to be a period of isolation. And I don't mind that for me, right? For me and Reggie, that would might have been manageable. But for Ian, I really did not want that for Ian, you know?
Mhm.
And I know in a lot of places where English is
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
spoken,
Mhm.
you can kind of your kids can go to expat schools and I didn't want that for Ian either. You know what I mean? Like I wanted Ian to have an immersive experience in the place where we emigrated to. So all of
Mhm.
that was on my mind. And then the last piece of it is I would really like to completely divest from the United States. So I would like to take my skills and
Hmm.
talents and put them to use in Barbados, right? In the place where we landed. And so um, having an English speaking place where I could conceivably take a bar exam and practice law or right use my education and skills for the betterment of that place was important to me as well. So those were that's kind of the
Hmm.
framework that we were working with,
Hmm.
right? And then the Caribbean ended up
Hmm.
making sense because of my nationality, right? So because I was born in Guyana
Right.
and um, the Caribbean states have a community essentially, right, called CARICOM. And so CARICOM allows for some movement of Caribbean nationals throughout the nation states that are partners in CARICOM. And so that opened up the Caribbean to us,
Hmm.
essentially, right? So we thought seriously about Guyana, which is where I was born.
Hmm.
Um, we ultimately decided against Guyana because Guyana is in this like oil rush situation, right? Um, there was
Yeah, I
a
read about
ton of
that.
oil,
Hmm.
yeah, discovered off the coast of Guyana, and so because of that, they're like housing in Guyana is extremely expensive right now. Everything is more expensive in Guyana, and it's a bubble, right? Like that's not going to be true forever.
Mm.
So that seems like um, a
Hmm.
difficult transition financially. And then two, Guyana is the
Hmm.
education system and the healthcare system in Guyana are both not as good as in Barbados. So those were kind of the factors that led us away
Yeah.
from Guyana. But we went to the Bahamas
Oh,
several
you
times
cut out
before
there
we
for a minute.
decided. Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying Reggie and
Oh,
I,
you went.
in deciding where we were going to land, went to Barbados several times, obviously, before we moved. We went to Jamaica. We went to Guyana more than
Hmm.
twice. We went to Guyana twice, and then to the
Hmm.
Bahamas. So we kind of, over the course of a couple of
Hmm.
years, looked at all of those places and landed on Barbados as the right answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to interject a data point here because although Deidre, you were able to leverage your Guyanese citizenship in order to
Mhm.
come into Barbados through the sort of CARICOM access arrangement, but that's not the only way to
Right.
migrate to Barbados. And people who are U.S. citizens that don't have dual citizenship still have pathways to Barbados, which I looked up for you, and I looked up for
Yeah.
Crystal. I think, another person who is there too. And they do have a digital nomad program. They do have a residency program for retirees. So just, if you're listening to this and you're like, Barbados, didn't think about
Yeah.
that. Don't think that just because this was the pathway that Deirdre was able to utilize because of her particular situation, that it's not accessible to you. There's different visa
Right.
programs for different people that have different conditions and circumstances. So, and just
Yes.
wanted to say
And
that. So,
the
okay,
thing that I
so
will hold on,
you
Elizabeth, let
landed
me
on
just
Barbados.
underscore. Right. Yeah, let me underscore the kind of like the sentiment around immigration to Barbados, right? So, first of all, like the leadership in Barbados is very
Okay.
open to immigration. So, Mia Motley is the prime minister of Barbados, and you can see her talking about like how Barbados needs immigrants for various reasons, right? And it's an island nation. Like a lot of places in the Caribbean, a lot of people have moved away from Barbados, in the 60s and 70s. And so it's underpopulated. And so Mia Motley, the first place that I saw her talking about
Hmm.
this was on Trevor Noah's podcast, which I'm happy to share a link with you. And we
Oh,
could put it
wow.
in the show notes, right? Um, And so she was talking really about how the whole economy could use, it's not like Barbados needs immigrants to clean roads, right? And that's it. She's like, from top to bottom, the economy is in need um of workers. And so there's the very sort of open attitude towards immigrants in Barbados. There's also a lot of um Asians who live abroad or in Barbados all the time. So, you know,
Mhm.
we have come across folks who live in the States, who live in Canada, who live in England, who nonetheless are in Barbados for vacation every year, right? Like, so I say all of that to say
Right.
that,
Snowbirds.
yeah, yes, exactly. So actually the rental that we're in right now is owned by Bajans who live in Canada. And so we're in this rental till December, and then they'll be back. They'll be back in January, and they'll be, in country from January to May, and then they'll rent their place out again from May to December. So, um, and that's not that unusual, you know? So, all of that's to
Mhm.
say there is certainly the way that you're received by people like by Bajans. We have not come across any kind of negative, like, why are you in Barbados? You know what I mean? Whose job are
Yeah.
you taking?
Yeah.
Sort of nonsense. That's not really a thing, um,
Right.
at all.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah. So I just wanted to underscore that.
That's that's good. No, that's a real no, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that's, this sort of gentrifier, colonizer, expat enclave
Mhm.
developer um uh issue is obviously very present in Mexico where we live.
Yeah.
Um it's a huge point of contention in, Spain and Portugal and really throughout popular places in Europe. And, I
Right.
think that's actually I didn't know that. I didn't know that Mia Motley was deliberately encouraging
Hmm.
um, sort of high level immigration, which is that's very promising. I wanna ask you a question about when you say it's underpopulated because, I'm an environmentalist first, right? I'm like
Hmm.
an environmental conservation person
Right.
through to my soul, right? So, like, I'm always worried about what are they doing to the environment in order to create housing and infrastructure and, whatever
Hmm.
else they decide they need to accommodate influxes of immigrants. And I'm curious as to, but I also know that Barbados is very advanced when it comes to like their big picture sustainability plans and all of that.
Yes.
Advanced relative to the US for sure, advanced relative
Right.
to, a lot of countries in the region. So I'm curious about that.
Yes.
Like, yeah, how's
So,
that playing out?
it's been really interesting because there isn't really, at least we have not found the, like, this is where the expats are in Barbados, right? Like, that isn't really a thing. We are living in a
I love
development
that.
that is a mix of Bayesians and medical students. So, and the medical students come from all over. Um, and so that's kind of where we are right now. That's kind of the mix, right? But like the people who live next door to us on either side are Bayesians. Actually, my husband went to rent a storage unit
Mm.
and realized that the lady who was working at the storage facility lives doors from us, two doors down from us. So
Ah,
it's
wow.
so it's very like Coverly is a development, but it's not an expat development by any means, or even like a snowbirds
Yeah.
development. Like there are mo it's like a lot of Bayesians, and then there are some snowboards, and there are students, and right mixed in. So,
Yeah.
there isn't really any place in Barbados that is like this is there. There are places that are very tourist centered in Barbados, right? So, like
Sure.
St. Lawrence
Yeah.
Gap, which is where we stayed in an Airbnb in March when we went in March for spring break. That is we have figured out is like where all the tourists are. right? And so, and part of the way it's
Right.
funny because
Right.
part of the way that we figured that out is we went and had brunch at a place where we had brunch in March, and there was nobody there when we went in July. And they were like, "Yeah, this is our quiet season, you know?
Yeah.
Tourists don't really come
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
Barbados in July. It's pretty good and hot in Barbados in July, although it's not as hot as it is here in Florida."
Mhm.
So, there are places
Get
that are
that ocean
catering.
breeze.
Yeah, yes. So that is like a moderating, because everywhere on the island you're kind of close to the ocean, it moderates the temperatures. Um, so it
Mhm.
doesn't get anywhere near as hot as it does
Yeah.
here in Central Florida, which is where I am right now. So
Mhm.
all of that to say, yes, there are places that cater to tourists. There are areas of the islands that cater to tourists. But when I say Barbados is
Mhm.
underpopulated, like if you drive on the island, you'll see what I mean. Because there are entire swaths of land
Mm.
that you can tell were not that long
Mhm.
ago, like sugarcane fields or right, um, things like that that are just not cleared.
Mm. Okay. Mhm.
Right, they're just grown over, or you know what I mean. And so that has been a really interesting part of
Mhm.
living in
So it's not
Barbados.
like
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
no, I was just we have a lag, so sorry, it's annoying. But, no, I was just gonna know, like, since you said that they were not long ago, they were, plantation fields, right? So it's not as if they are high value, forest ecosystems. They're basically in
Right.
that transitionary kind of from agriculture to scrubs. Yeah. Mhm. Which
Exactly.
is important, like, when you're thinking about development and building.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. So that is what I was going to say is I have been struck by how just the landscape of Barbados evidences the recency of colonization, right? This is the thing that struck me. It has, I have
Mhm.
encountered this everywhere that we've been in the Caribbean, right? Because in some ways, all of these places
Mm.
look similar. And when I say that, what I mean is in all of these places, you're going to encounter like sort of giant houses that you can tell were
Mhm.
owned by the colonizers, right? And then sort of situated around them are, shacks essentially, right? And that
Mhm.
uh, visual is true in Bimini. It's true in Barbados. It's true in Guyana. It's true in Montego Bay. Like really everywhere that I've been in the Caribbean. And we were driving on the main road in Barbados, and I said to Reggie, I bet if we go to South Africa, it'll look kind of similar to the right. Like you'll see this
Mhm. Yeah.
same kind of mix
Mhm.
of um
Yeah.
residential. You know what I'm
Well, and I
saying?
think in Latin America as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, and in Latin America as well. I would not in Cozumel because Cozumel just has a very different history than most places in Mexico and most places in the Caribbean. But like the places where they had the haciendas and
Right.
the people that worked on the haciendas, like
Yes.
that's very much still in certain places. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Barbados became independent from the crown in the 60s. Like this was not that long ago, right? It's 1966, November of 1966. So
Mm-hmm.
Barbados has been post-colonial, if you will, for
Mm-hmm.
60 years, which is just not that long, right? This
Mm-hmm.
in the
It's
lifetime of
not.
my
It's
parents.
not. Yeah.
The same is true of Ghana. Ghana celebrated 60 years of independence in May. So, and you can still, my point is, you can still very much see that on the landscape of the place, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
similarly, you can
Yeah.
sort of feel it in the kind of culture as well, right? Like it's still,
Mm.
there is a sort of level of formality, right? And I've been like interacting with like
Oh,
immigration
yeah.
and stuff like that, um, in Barbados and really realizing how culturally kind of British it is.
Mhm, mhm. So now that's an interesting point, and I wonder, because now that you're experiencing that, right? Because you're
Mhm.
actually residing there, right? And so that's a very
Yeah.
different experience from visiting. And when you picked up on that and you started to feel that and realize that is, the culture, how are you managing that? Does it feel good to you? Does it feel like something you can adjust to, or does it
Oh,
feel like
yeah. It
suffocating
definitely
in the long term?
no. So in some ways I really appreciate it, right? Because one of the things that we noticed right away is there's no kind of fake warmth in Barbados, you know? Like if you're in a store or at the
Fake what?
immigration office, warmth.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Mhm.
Right. That this is not a thing culturally in Barbados. Um, so I lived in the Midwest for 10 years, and Barbados is kind of the opposite of Midwest nice, which I fully appreciate because Midwest nice was some nonsense, right? Like, it was very performative, right? And so I was, how they joke that New Yorkers are
Mhm.
kind but not nice? So to me, culturally, this feels very familiar, right? Because I grew up in New York, which I think it's true that New Yorkers are
Yeah,
kind but not nice. Um, so to me, that it feels very
I
culturally
agree.
familiar. And Caribbeans generally don't really do the performative nice, right? Like, at, there are like jokes anywhere. Look on the
No, you
internet, you'll
don't.
see, right? You'll see jokes about how your relatives greet you by saying, "Oh, you get fat," right? So, like,
Mhm,
just
mhm.
generally, right?
Yes.
Caribbeans don't do fake nice. So to me, it feels very culturally familiar. Um, for my husband and my son, who are Americans, it was jarring, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I can imagine. Yeah, it's so funny because when you say that, like, my daughter's grandmother was from Jamaica, right? She passed away,
Hmm.
but she was from Jamaica. She was from Kingston, and, and she was, socioeconomically from very poor background or whatever. So talk
Hmm.
about, like, a blunt and,
Yes,
just, like, there's no yeah, we experienced that very, very, we had to get comfortable with that. I want to, read from the comments real quick. So, um,
sure.
uh, the person whose name is escaping me, who writes about living in Panama, and I'm so sorry that your name is escaping me right now because I know it, but it's just not. It's not right there. She says she's from Trinidad, and if we don't like you, we will let you know. Our blood doesn't take you.
Exactly. Yeah,
um,
in Ghana, we say
McKinney, thank you,
the spirit
McKinney.
don't feel you,
Um,
right? Like my spirit doesn't. You're not sitting right with my spirit. That's how Irish people say it, which I think is hilarious.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and Will said, "No one is blessing your heart, eh?"
Absolutely not. Nope.
But Will has a question that I wanted to. Yeah, yeah. Will has a question, and before I ask the question, I just want to know. I'm also from New York, and I agree about the kind but not nice. Like, we'll do
Hmm.
what needs to be done for you, even if that
Right.
means telling you the truth about yourself that you didn't want to hear,
Yes.
but you needed to hear it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that too. Okay, so Will's question is about Barbados's politics. I'm curious about Barbados's politics given the 60-year post-colonial situation. Do you find it more conservative politically in Barbados?
Huh. So this is an interesting question. Um, politically, I definitely don't find it more conservative than the U.S. I mean, I've lived in Florida and Ohio for the last 20 years, right? 15, 17 years, whatever, a long time. So it's hard to get more conservative than Florida and Ohio. Um, so I have not experienced it as more
Mhm.
politically conservative. And certainly in many ways, it's more politically progressive. It's more progressive economically, right? It's you'll if you Google Mia Motley today, you will hear her um chastising one of the biggest uh grocery chains in Barbados because food prices have been rising and rising, and they made an what she conceives of as an exorbitant amount of money last year. And she's like, you could have made half that money and still been doing great. And people could have gotten their groceries at more reasonable prices, you know? And so just think like it is impossible to even envision an American head of state saying something like that, right? So definitely more progressive economically,
Yeah.
definitely more
Yeah.
progressive in terms of the environment, right? Um, and I mean, they believe in science. So in all of those ways, I definitely have not experienced it as conservative. Here's what I will say though. You can't throw a rock in Barbados without hitting a church, right? So there are just, I mean, it's a lot of churches. Um, and that,
Yeah.
th- most Bajans identify as Christians. And so you do see that culturally, right? I don't think it's not in their politics
Ooh, I have a
in the same
question.
way. You know what I mean? I I don't see it in their politics in the
Yeah.
same way that we see it in our politics in the States. But there is
Hmm.
uh, a religiosity that's cultural, right? And then,
Hmm.
Reggie and I have been sort of trying to figure out the gender dynamics in Barbados, um, because they're a little different
Hmm.
than in the US in ways that we're encountering as interesting and informative, right? I'll give you a perfect
Mm.
example. Reggie has some people over.
Yeah,
My
please.
husband is that guy. He's that guy that everybody wants to chat with and blah blah. It doesn't matter where he goes. He's just that person, right? So he has started to make friends in Barbados, um, men that are friends. And so he had a couple of them over to the house and on a Sunday, and I was making Sunday dinner. She was making meatloaf. So we made meatloaf, and Reggie and I make meatloaf, Reggie makes mashed potatoes. This is how we have always done it as long as we have been together. I don't make mashed potatoes because Reggie makes great mashed potatoes. So almost done cooking, and I've made everything, the vegetables, the meatloaf, I've made everything with mashed potatoes. And I said to him, I said, babe, I'm waiting on you now, right? To make the mashed potatoes. And it was two guys, and one of them was like, you make mashed potatoes? And Reggie was like, yeah. But he was like floored that Reggie would be cooking, right? And I was like, how do y'all
Yeah.
eat? Like, I don't
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
How are men eating here? Because this doesn't make any sense to me.
You know the answer to
So
that.
I do know the answer.
You know
Yes,
the answer to that,
I do
though.
know the
You know the
answer.
answer to that.
And Reggie has been it's funny because Reggie has been more put off by it than I have. Like, it irritates him. This is one of the things that he complains about is he'll be in Bridgetown and it's the middle of the day and there are all these like open street bars, right? And there will be just men sitting at the bar. And he's like, how are they just sitting at the bar on a
Mhm.
Wednesday at 1 o'clock? I don't understand. Don't you have things to do? Don't you have things to handle? Like, what is happening? And he's like,
No, because the women in their lives are doing it all.
exactly. And he's like, who you don't see sitting at the bar? They're the women. There are no women sitting at those bars, right? And so he has been really like annoyed with that. So the gender dynamic there is it's interesting. It's almost like um it's it in a way it's like men are extras, right? Like it's almost like they are not, do you know what I'm saying? It's really odd. I'm finding it really odd because it is misogynistic in a totally different way than how American society is misogynist. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So, Makina says rum shop culture.
Exactly. You got
And
it,
I
Makina.
know what you're yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about exactly. And what is really interesting to me, and I'm gonna say something that I don't know how it'll rub people, but look, this is the education I have, it's the experience, it's the observations that right? What's really interesting to me is, we talked about colonial influence
Hmm.
and obviously colonialism from Europe, right, in the Caribbean is heavily patriarchal for sure, right?
Yes,
Man's the head of
absolutely.
household, little woman is, blah blah blah, all right.
Right.
But that is not exclusive to Europe.
Right.
Misogyny is not exclusive to Europe. Misogyny, patriarchy predates European colonialism, right? And it's interesting to me because when I have spoken to African women is particularly women who, were born and raised and in families from West Africa, like they've expressed to me that exact same dynamic and actually, like,
Hmm.
when back in college, I remember I took a class about African culture, anthropology, whatever, and they talked about that as well, that the bulk of labor falls to women, and
Hmm.
men get a lot of free time to sit around and lime, right? Chat with each
Right.
other and hang out and relax while women are eating everything. So it's really interesting because to me, when I like, and again, I had Jamaican family, right? So same situation. And I'm talking about in the
Hmm.
United States, in, kind of Jamaican enclaves. It's the same
Yeah.
exact dynamic. Dudes will sit around and play dominoes all day, and women are doing everything.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me that Reggie is the one bothered by it, though. Like, what is he saying
Yes.
about it?
Well,
What is the
so
crux of his frustration?
he just doesn't understand like how this works, right? Like, so the thing is that Reggie and I have had a kind of non-traditional gender roles anyway. So Reggie's been like a serial entrepreneur, right?
Hmm.
So he has been the primary parent for our kids as long as we've been together. So, and he got all kind of crazy looks about that in the States, right? So he would show up for like uh PTA meetings and the teachers would just be flabbergasted. Like, you're here for the PTA meeting? That's amazing. And he would be like, is it really though? I mean, this is my kid. You needed a parent. I'm a parent. Right. And so Reggie has had that side of this experience,
Yeah.
right? Which he also found frustrating. Um,
Hmm.
And, when we
Hmm.
had a bunch of younger kids, it would drive us both crazy because we would tell people, like, if a child needs to be picked up, call Reggie first. Like, Reggie's here, he's at his own shop, he's going to be able to come get a kid a
He's
lot
the one to
faster
pick
than
up.
I am, right? No, they refused. They refused. Without fail, they would call me first. And that was true. Even if Reggie was also there for PTA and volunteering and right, they still would call me first. And I was like, what is happening? So we've had that version of this experience, right? In Barbados,
Hmm.
it's almost like they assume that men don't have are incompetent. There's almost like an assumption of incompetence, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you a good example of this is Reggie. We bought a car. We bought a Nissan Leaf, and Reggie went to go get it registered. And somebody at the office was like, "Your wife is letting you
Hmm.
handle this?" And he was like, "Letting? Like, I mean, yes, she is. I mean, I don't know how to answer this question, right?" And so there's almost like an
Here's
assumption,
my permission slip.
right? He was like, "What?" But
Uh,
so he finds the whole dynamic of like men don't
yeah.
have it's almost like they don't have value. Like there's a particular kind of value that men have or are
Mhm.
presumed to have in the States that is not. the
Mm.
underlying presumption in Barbados, you know?
That's okay. Now that explains the crux, what you're saying to me. Like that, now I understand why it bothers him, because essentially,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, it's an assumption that you can't handle anything, you're not competent,
Right.
and you don't have any
Yes.
purpose, right? Yeah. That. Let
Right.
me go to the comments real quick and read a few comments. So, um, Will said, yes, I've also talked to some African women here in France who have not necessarily directly talked about it, but alluded to it in terms of African culture. I'll have to keep my ears open. Makina
Hmm.
says, she has a Panamanian friend who boasted to my husband that he hasn't changed but 5 diapers on his 4-month-old babies, a 4-month-old baby, because they have so much household help and it's not his job. She said, we could never.
Wow.
And Will said, people's audacity. Yeah, yeah. And
The
and
actual
just to be
audacity.
fair, like, let's be fair. I want to be fair. Yeah, no, I want to be fair though, and not like overly make this a Caribbean black men thing,
Yes.
because I remember talking to a woman who's from, oh God, where's she from? Oh, she's South Asian. I can't remember what country she's from in South Asia. But same deal. She was like engaged to a guy, from her same country. I think they're Pakistani. I'm not sure, but engaged to a guy from her same country. And they actually broke up because when they had a conversation about parenting, he was like, no, I don't expect to change any
I
diapers
won't
or
be
whatever.
doing
And
that.
she pressed him
Right.
on it and pressed him on it. And she asked him directly, yeah, she asked him directly. She said, um, I want a number. Give me a number of how many diapers you expect to change if we have one child." And this man said to her, 7. That was his number. 7. That was his
Wow.
max. How many
Insane.
to change on his child. And ultimately, yeah, so, like, this is not, and I think, honestly,
No.
that's the direction that, like, the United States, the white Christian
Well, okay,
nationalism,
so
people want to go.
yeah, let me underscore this because I
Yeah, go.
actually think there are kind of two things happening here, right? That I want to like pull apart a little bit. So one is how much do men parent, right? Like how much responsibility do men have for their children and household tasks, right? Cooking, cleaning, that kind of thing. And I think that even now in America, the presumption is very little, right? And so I say that
Mm,
I have a
mhm,
son who's 27 years old who has 2 little kids, and for many years, he worked and his wife for like 3 years, he worked and his wife was home with the kids, and now they have switched, and she's gone to work and he's home with their kids. And every time he's out with those kids, somebody comments on it, right? And he's like, "But they're my kids." Like in the big 26, is this what we're doing? And so, he's
mhm,
constantly like the bar for fathers is on the floor. Like I'm not doing anything exciting. I'm not doing
mm,
anything my wife didn't do for 3 years, you know? And no
mm.
one ever commented to Haley, like, you're doing such a fantastic job caring for your own children, you know? And so
Mhm,
that so there's that piece of it that is specific, I think, to labor that's coded as women's work. I think that coding is still
yeah,
very true in the States, right? So I don't even think that's like a
yeah,
global South
yeah,
phenomenon by any means. Um,
no,
the other piece, the piece that's weird in Barbados, is that that sort of incompetence that's presumed about men within the household is kind of presumed about men in Barbados writ large, right? Like even outside of the household. Do you know what I mean? Which is why, like, for
yeah,
Reggie to show up to register our
which is
car and
why they
have
got me a
people
Motley.
right. Right. So, but it's an interesting thing, right? Because um it's not like, how women are presumed to not be able to fix things. Like this is outside of your capacity. It's not that kind of thing. It's more like, we shouldn't expect of you that you will do these things because your wife we expect that your wife is going to do. Do you know what I mean? So it's not
Yeah.
it's not a like, it's not a disrespectful kind. In a way, it's kind of like it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of like a
You're
kingly
too
kind of
good for
thing.
you're too good for, like, this
Right.
type of work. You shouldn't have to lower
Exactly.
yourself to this minutia because
Mm.
you're a king. Yeah.
It's more that. Yeah. So it's a really
Yeah, yeah.
interesting um cultural experience, right? Um, and
Yeah.
I will say for me, uh-oh, my camera just almost cut out. So for me, I grew up in a culture like Chinese culture is like this to some extent, but not to this extent, right? So Guyanese fathers, I mean, if they're around, are pretty hands-on. You know, the Guyanese fathers that I grew up
Mhm.
around, like, took care of their kids, cooked for their kids. Like it was
Mm,
never that sort of only women can do this kind of
that's
thing did
interesting.
not exist in the Guyanese culture Guyanese men cook, period. Like this is not,
Mm,
it's not that weird. I think
well,
it's true to some extent in Jamaica as well, you know? Um, so
yes.
there's that different, like Barbados is different, at least the parts of it that I have experienced in that way.
So, I'm curious, like, what do you think and that I mean, this is obviously a very big question that could probably
Hmm.
fill several books, right? But what do you think is the cultural influence that differentiates the way that shows up in Guyana versus Barbados?
So I'm not sure. So part of what is very different between Guyana and Barbados is Guyana is very ethnically diverse, right? So
Mhm. Right.
there are people from, Indians from India, there are Native Americans, there are, you know, still some uh people who are of English ancestry. There are Portuguese people, right? So there's like a big mix of
Mm,
cultures and ethnicities in Guyana. And that's not really true in Barbados. Barbados is like
mhm,
96%
mm,
Black. Um, and so I don't know to what extent that is right. Like the reference back to West Africa, I think probably has some salience,
mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's not, I don't know if the other thing is, and maybe this is more has to do with it, is the religion, because Guyana is also very diverse
Mm,
religiously, right? So there are Muslims in Guyana, there are Hindus, there are Christians, right? There are all kinds of religious expressions and practices in Guyana. And that's really not true in Barbados. Barbados is predominantly Christian. And so
mhm,
if I'm like theorizing about why this is this way, I would put those two things together, right? Like sort of West African
mhm,
cultural influences plus Christian
mhm.
patriarchy gets you there pretty quick, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, 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 for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. Yeah, because one of the things I was just thinking about when you were talking about the ethnic diversity and the different cultural influences in Guyana, it sounds very similar to the makeup in Belize. But
Hmm.
Belize
Yep.
is like is like, what you said about throwing a stone, right? Belize is like they push Christianity hard and there are other religious minorities, but it's very much like Christian culture. And I don't know
Mm.
what the gender dynamics are like in Belize other than the fact that I know that um women do a lot.
Yeah.
Women do a lot. Yeah. Will said I was just about to say it's probably religion. Um, Makina had said before she left that the shared parenting is a very North American and Northern European type of thing.
Mm.
And she had to hop off, but enjoyed this discussion very thoroughly. Um, I want to I want to ask you a question about a very much related subject,
Hmm.
which is homophobia. I know homophobia runs fairly rampant throughout Caribbean culture that I've been exposed to.
Mm.
But I'm curious about Barbados. Like, what have you, if anything, like, have you picked up on kind of the attitude?
I have not really. I will say that. The only like instance of this coming into my thinking at all is, Mia Motley has never married, right? And so she's
Really?
never been married. Mm-mm. And
Okay.
so of course there are rumors, right, around her sexuality.
Mhm.
Uh but when you
Mhm.
talk to your average Bayesian, and first of all, I have yet to meet anybody who doesn't like Mia Motley, right? Who is not like excited about her leadership, etc. But you certainly don't hear from Bayesians any kind of off color stuff like that. You know what I mean? I'm sure that there is some subset of the
Yeah.
community that is suspicious, right? Um, and that's
Mhm.
where those
Mhm.
rumors are emanating from. But it's not pervasive in the culture. You know what I'm saying? It's not like
Mhm.
that's not the
Yeah.
thing that people lead with when they're talking about Mia Motley. I also have kind of a nuanced take
Mhm.
on um, homophobia in Caribbean cultures writ large, right? Um,
Mhm.
because I think so. I'll say a few things about this. First of all, I grew up listening to the same, to reggae music. You grew up in New York, kind of around the same time, so um,
Yeah.
Boom
We
Bye Bye
heard
was
all
playing
the,
on the
yeah,
radio,
all the,
right? Okay, so
yeah.
that,
Yeah.
so I think that uh, those references are front of mind for Americans because that's the version of the culture that came to the States, right? But I also think that there's a reason that that's
Mhm.
a version. So I have a nuanced take on this in part because it's clear to me as someone who grew up in sort of a Caribbean subculture that gender is more expansive in the Caribbean. And so when I say that, what I mean is like I grew up with some very pretty boys, right? Who do you know what I'm saying? Like that's and it wasn't no one questioned it. No one like picked on you. You know what I'm saying? And then I grew up in a family that was also very um matriarchal, right? Where like my grand was the
Mhm.
head of our family. Even though she was married, okay, no one looked to her husband as the authority figure, right? And so I say that to say
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
I have a like my lived experience of gender in a Caribbean family and
Mhm.
in a Caribbean subculture is much less restrictive than the versions of gender that I see in American society, right? So
That's really interesting.
so my perspective on it is just a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then I
Yeah.
do think that uh there is obviously homophobia in Caribbean culture, much of it sort of tied
Mhm.
to conservative Christian notions of gender and sexuality,
Yeah.
right? Um
Right.
and but I mean no more so than in Midwest culture, also tied
Yeah.
to Christian, right? Like so I think
Yeah.
Caribbean cultures get kind of the, the difference is that Caribbeans say the thing out loud and in the Midwest they're Midwest nice, right? That's the difference. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sort of attitudes and the places that those attitudes are coming from very similar.
Yeah, yeah. That's see, I think the reason I make an assumption, I guess, and I'll be frank, like when I have queer clients, who are looking for a place to leave, a place to, to go outside of the US, I don't typically advise them to look at Caribbean countries because
Yeah,
of, like my perception of it. But my perception of it is very, very heavily from Jamaica. And it's very,
right.
very heavily from not just, my family members, but in Jamaican communities. And even like now, like there's a person in my family who's first generation, um, Jamaican, and her parents, she's marrying into my family basically. And her
Mhm.
parents are, or her mother actually is very, very like in denial, in, just like you're very, very opposed. And
Mhm.
I remember growing up, not growing up, but hearing, hearing my daughter's grandmother tell me stories of the like really, really horrific hate crimes that, were perpetrated, particularly on gay men in Kingston,
Mhm.
when she was there, but that was also a long time ago, right? But I mean, like, she literally
Right.
told me that she saw people being burned with tires, right? So,
Wow.
like, I think those stories, yeah, I think those stories and that, like, being around, hearing that, and that's colored my
Mhm.
perception a lot. That said, like, I also went to Belize not long ago, and I saw quite a few, like, very openly gay women, like, obviously
Yeah.
gay women or masculine presenting women going about their business, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I like this."
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
this is
That
good
doesn't
to see.
surprise
So,
me.
yeah, I mean, generalizations are always going to fall flat.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is, I don't know that I would recommend the Caribbean for queer folks. You know what I mean? I don't I, I would need to do a lot more um recon, I guess. Right? To
Yeah,
make that. But that
yeah,
being
yeah,
said,
yeah,
I definitely have queer members of my family, and I wouldn't feel any way about them coming to Barbados to see us. You know what I mean? To visit us. Um,
okay, yeah,
that like I
yeah.
wouldn't feel worried about that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And that's also a really nuanced conversation as well because like, I actually had this conversation with someone not long ago who's thinking about leaving and that person is trans and,
Mhm.
a trans woman and,
Right.
it was like and she was thinking about, particular African country, like just visiting an African country, and she was like, and she had a conversation with her friend that she was going to visit, and the friend was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, like you plan to actually be out and trans like here? Yeah, maybe not."
Yeah.
you know,
So,
so it now
this
somebody that
is
is not
interesting.
visibly queer, might have a
Right.
different experience.
I agree. But this is the interesting thing to me is it's not clear to me where trans people are safe in this moment, right? Like, it's definitely not in
Especially
the
if they're
States.
Black, like, there literally aren't. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's true. I mean, there there are there are remaining, sort of trans enclaves in Europe and Uruguay,
Right.
and, there are
In the
places where
States, right?
there
Like in New York.
are, and even within, within. Mhm. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like, in Mexico, there are particular cities that have, progressive politics and big
Mhm.
trans or gay communities, queer communities, that will be accepting of trans people, but it is very location specific. And then the compounding factor, which is it's so hard to have this conversation with clients because the reality is if you're both Black and trans, there
Right.
really aren't a lot of, you know, secure options. And
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's basically it's down to finding a particular neighborhood in a particular city,
Right.
right? Where
Yes.
that there are other people that can kind of be a community. But it's yeah,
Right.
it's distressing. But anyway, mm,
Agreed.
back to Barbados.
I will do some more recon on Barbados on that front when I get back.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear. So, one other question I have, and then we're at the hour. I mean, I have a couple more minutes to
Yeah.
keep going. I don't know if what's your
I'm
time?
fine. Yeah, yeah. I have a
Yeah.
couple more minutes.
Okay. Okay, cool. I want to know about, because again, this is like another ubiquitous question that faces people that are looking to emigrate, and particularly people from emigrating from the US that have like enough resources, right, to do that. And
Right.
I and typically the big rub comes when you have people that are immigrating to a country that has a lower GDP, lower, sort of salary bands, just
Hmm.
less money, right? And then
Yeah.
people who are coming from the US with comparatively more money. And you
Right.
have that economic inequity that causes all of this friction, right? Which obviously it's going to cause. And I get the sense that Barbados doesn't have such a stark economic, like a the haves and the haves not, but I don't know if that's true. So
Yeah,
speak to
that
us
is my sense of things as well. Um, I don't, you don't see the kind of extreme poverty in Barbados. You know what I mean? Um,
about.
that
Mm-hmm.
you see in places in the States. I mean, there are parts of, Southwest Atlanta that are visibly more run down, poorer than any place I've been in Barbados, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Mm.
then,
Wow.
the most of the people that we have interacted with are, um, you know, like one of my husband's, the best friend my husband's made there is a cab driver, and he's doing fine, right? Like that's not like you can make a living, right? Um, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
when I said Barbados is more economically progressive, like some of the things on their agenda are um ensure like raising the level of home ownership in Barbados, right? So they're little when I say on the agenda, I mean on the legislative agenda, right?
Mm.
So the the politics
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
very like sort of keenly aware of the problems of inequality, you know? And then too, Barbados is also
Mhm.
like a
Mhm.
highly educated place, so Barbados
Yeah.
has like a 99% literacy rate, right? Um, Tertiary education is
That's
free
amazing.
for Bayesian citizens, right? You can go to UE for free. So these sort of like the things that Americans struggle to get and do for their families is just not a struggle in the same way in Barbados, and I think that that is helpful,
Yeah.
you know? Uh, so that's kind of my sense of things. Though, I haven't done any
Yeah.
um, quantitative or qualitative studying, but just from my observation,
Yeah. No, understood. Of course. Yeah, but you're grown enough, right? You're grown enough to
yeah,
look around you and get a sense of things.
yes,
And I think what you mentioned earlier about Mia Motley calling to task a major corporation and particularly a
hmm,
supermarket chain is like that is the government actually doing its job, right? And
right,
and not coming from this baseline assumption that a corporate entity making maximum profits is a worthy goal in and of itself, or
right,
a marker of success for your country,
right,
right? That's like
exactly,
when you say that she did that, it reinforces to me how far off the deep end the United States has gone with its allegiance to these corporate,
yeah,
puppeteers at this point, right? And
right,
so,
yes,
like, yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a good thing. That's a good question to end on. Is like, how do you feel? And you can speak for Reggie to the extent you know as well, and even for your son if I mean, he's 14, so he's probably not paying that much attention to the politics,
yeah,
but like, how does it feel to be in a place where there is this fundamental sanity about what the role of government is, and what the role of society is, and what the roles of corporate actors should be.
Yeah, it's kind of it's sort of this dual thing, right? Because there is a really stark contrast between, the Asian political discourse and American political discourse, right? And because the rest of my
Mm-hmm.
family is still here in the States, it's like very painful to watch, even from afar, um, to watch
Mm-hmm.
the extent to which corporate interests are just, trying to shut down any sort of people power over and over again in all the ways, right? And so I feel like deep grief for that. And then at the same time, it is good to be someplace where it's like, oh, it doesn't have to be that way, right? This is not some natural
Yeah.
occurrence, right? This is about sort of choices that
Yes.
have been made along the way, um, to get there. And we
Mhm.
can make other choices. We can make different choices, right? And so, in that sense, it's like there
Mhm.
is hope for a different kind of future, you know?
There's Yeah,
Uh, yeah. So that's been good.
yeah.
That's because when you're in the
That
States,
is
it doesn't
wow.
feel like that,
That's
you know?
deep. Yeah. No, that's so deep, and I think that is, I get all this flack from people, right? Who like to shame people who have left the United States, right?
Mhm.
um, you should have stayed and fight. You're a coward, blah blah blah. But I think that piece gets lost. The extent to which your mental framework when you're inside the United States and is shrunken, right? Is
Right,
just restricted to this current reality. And then of course you have to throw in all the
right,
panic and all the suffering, and being broke and being
right.
sick, and all of that. It just exacerbates that sense that you're in this tiny little horrible cage
Bah.
that
Yeah.
is reality. And in reality, people who are existing in other countries that don't do it that way, and that demonstrate that we don't have to do it that way, and this is not the only way, is essential. It's essential for our
Absolutely.
future. If Can you imagine if the only people leading the world into the future are people that are in that emergency mode, and that are in that restrictive reality that basically, impossible to survive. We can't
Yeah.
have only people living in that
No.
reality shaping our world,
Exactly.
you
And just in
know?
the most basic way, I was telling my daughter this. Um, I just have more bandwidth in Barbados, right? Because like I
Mhm.
send my son to the grocery store and I'm not worried that someone is gonna
Mhm.
call the cops on him. Like I'm just not worried about that, you know? And
Yeah.
this is a kid
Yeah.
that's 6 feet tall and he has dreads. So you know what I mean? Like in
Yeah,
the
in the
States,
US, you would get snatched up by ICE. Yeah, 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 yeah.
exactly. In the States, anything could happen. Okay, well, I don't have to think about that in
Mm,
Barbados. And that frees me up to think other thoughts, right? To make
yeah,
other plans,
yeah,
to
yeah,
be more strategic, right? Like it frees me up in ways that I was hoping for, but I couldn't really conceptualize until we were there. And Ian says, "Oh, I want a frappuccino. I'm going to go to the square and get a frappuccino." And I'm like, "Cool." Not even thinking about it. Like not do you know what I mean? And so
yeah,
until you are it's one thing
yeah.
to sort of
Well,
intellectually think about that. It's something else to experience it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I felt that fear for my husband when we were living in Florida,
Mhm.
for sure, because he would regularly get followed by the cops, like
Right.
5 minutes from our house,
Yes.
and
Same.
I
I
think
mean, my
that
husband. Yeah.
I knew Yeah, like, I knew that that fear was present and something that I could not survive for, for the long term,
Right.
but you still don't really, really know how much energy is going to that until
Mhm.
it's removed.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I'm s that just I mean, to me, like, that one point that you made about your son being able to go get his frappuccino without
Mhm.
being without the risk of him getting, snatched up by ICE, harassed by local cops, but and you didn't say this, but I'll say it, like, some group of freaking, redneck white supremacist idiots
Right.
that decide they wanna,
Exactly.
whatever,
Yeah.
like, none of
Or,
those
George
factors
Zimmerman's,
being
like
present, that makes it worth it a
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that makes the
Absolutely.
whole thing worth it. Yeah, wow. I'm so happy to hear that though. Like that brings
Yeah.
me so much joy to know that like he's got that freedom, you've got that freedom, you deserve it, you deserve
Thank
it.
you.
And we should wrap, but I do want to say like I really want to say that anybody that's listening to this, um I want you to make sure that you tune out anybody that's if you know that the US is a dead end for you, literally and figuratively, and you want to leave, I need you to tune out people that have never done it, right? So they can't speak to the experience. I need you to tune out the people that wanna guilt you into staying because they know they would like to leave, but they can't, or they choose not to, but say they can't. I need you to tune out the people that would make you feel guilty, that will make you doubt yourself. Like, they have no business in this decision, and it's not the decision for everybody, and not everybody can do it, but don't let other people make that decision for you. Find out the correct information from people who actually have done it. You can come to me if you're willing to pay me. If you're not willing to pay me, then you can go on YouTube and Facebook and read from, whatever. That's fine. But the important thing is to listen to the people who are actually doing it and hear about and hear it from people who have similar circumstances to you. So people who share your identities, who share your education levels, who share your economic
Right.
situation, people that are actually somewhat in your shoes, and read their content. If you can speak to them, speak to them. Tune out the people that we're never going to be on board with this in the first place, because it can be the difference between life or death. Like, we're not joking
Yeah.
here, it's the difference between serious risk for a person like your son and living a normal healthy free life. And
Right.
nobody should have the authority over that decision making in your life other than you and your immediate loved ones that you're going with. So I just needed to say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. And I've been thinking about a post on reparations because Mia Motley, this is the other thing that she's doing on the world stage right now, is making maybe the most vociferous uh plea for, not even plea, argument for reparations for slavery. And this is, I think, really ought to be a Pan-African discussion, but America is sort of sitting outside of that discussion right now, and so I'm gonna write about that, pretty soon here, so keep an eye out for that for anybody who's interested in that.
I Yes, everybody watch out for that, keep an eye out. The fact that reparations are being discussed openly by people with real power and,
Mhm.
unapologetically just shows you how far away the United States is from the rest of the world in terms
Absolutely.
of, like, understanding history and injustice. Yeah, I love it. I can't wait to read it. All right, any closing thoughts, Deidre?
No, thank you so much for doing this with me today, though, Elizabeth. It was great to catch up and kind of reflect on where things are right now.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'm really grateful for your time and your insights, and thank you for sharing some. I always like say to myself when I do one of these lives, like, there's going to be one person who will listen to this and it will help them make their decision one way or the other,
Absolutely.
right? As opposed to being in the limbo, which can be a form of torture of itself, right? So
Yeah.
I have faith that
Yes,
this
we were
will
there for
help
10
at least
years.
one person to, make a decision and get right.
Yeah.
All right, Deidre. Thank you again. Thank you
Thank
everybody
you
for
too. Thank
joining.
you,
The
everybody who
recording will
came.
go out. I'll probably do some editing first. It's for the Yeah, and subscribe to Deidre. Subscribe to me if you haven't already. Paid subscriptions are always much appreciated, but free subscriptions are great too. And pass this on to anybody who you think needs it. And thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a great
Thank
day.
you. Bye.